Okay, welcome to the very first episode of our new podcast, The South Side. We will talk all things flag from a southern perspective, hopefully giving insight into some of the southern teams across what will be our three divisions for next year. I'm your host, Adam. I am QB for the Bucks Wolves. This is my second year in BAFA, having spent last year as the centre for the Wolves B team, the Wolfpack. Somehow I've graduated to QB1 for the Wolves the year just finished. And alongside me, I've got two guys that I play with who've both been in flag football far longer than I have. And I'll let you introduce yourselves. So, Gaz, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Gaz. So I started playing back for Lincolnshire Longhorns in 21, so still not a huge flag history. Moved to Bucks Wolves partway through the 22-23 season. Again, like Adam, I played for the Pack last year and was defensive captain. And then this year had the opportunity to step up and play for the Wolves with a couple of departures and was actually asked to be the captain for the Wolves defence again this year. Generally play linebacker, also cornerbacker and fourth string centre. And then outside of flag, I've helped with others set up a couple of tournaments, Flag Nakata when I was with the Longhorns and pre-season turf war for the Wolves last year.
Thank you. And Lewis, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so Lewis, cornerback for the Bucks Wolves, joined the club about 5 years ago, just before COVID, for the weird COVID year, and then have since kind of gone on to be the defensive captain previously, and now the defensive coordinator following Callum Dean's departure last year. Before flag, I played a bit of kitted at uni as well. And then, took up flag thereafter for a bit of less contact and less head injuries, which, as I say, I've been doing for the last 5 years with the Bucks Wolves.
Yeah, I think we all like to think that flag is less contact, when in reality it's just weirder contact.
I was going to say, you definitely can't say that it's more contact.
No, not more. Just contact in places that you wouldn't expect to normally get contact. Sounds a bit odd. But this is our first podcast, so just a breakdown of what we'll try and cover today. We intended to do this because it is the week after finals, or the week after the final weekend, so it's a good opportunity. We can do a recap of both the Division 1 and of the Premiership finals, and the games, the plates, all of the incorporated weekend. And we will start that by just going through the big storylines. Biggest of which being that on Saturday afternoon, all of us were there to watch the Glasgow Hornets beat the London Smoke 27-18 to win the Premiership for the second year in a row. Many congrats to them. It was a good performance, and we'll talk more about that later. We also had intended to go up to watch the Reading Devils compete. They did end up picking up the Premiership plate with a 48-28 victory over the Cheltenham Neptunes, and obviously we have our own links there with former Bucks Wolves founder Callum Dean now playing for the Devils. And then obviously our turn on the Sunday. We turned up for Division 1. There was obviously 4 wildcard games, which we'll discuss in detail shortly, but congratulations to those 4 teams that did win promotion. Luckily, we were one of those. Leicester Huntsmen went on to win the Division 1 Championship. They beat the Victoria Park Panthers, VPP, 31-27 in what was a very entertaining game. And the best bit of the weekend for us, at least, Bucks Wolves, we came away with the Division 1 plate following a forfeit victory, but with no hard feelings. A forfeit victory we'll talk about later over the Warrington Revolution. So that is everything we are going to discover, and let's prepare to dive into our Div 1 analysis. Okay, so looking at our Div 1 analysis to start. First of all, we had the kind of key point of the weekend, I think, for most teams that were going up with something to play for. There were 4 wildcard games that determined who was going to get promoted to the Premiership, along with the 8 seeded teams who'd already been promoted through the league rankings. Of those 4 games, obviously we mentioned, we ourselves were the 13th seed, Bucks Wolves. We played the 12th seed Nottingham Honey Badgers in a game that was a very close first half, and then kind of extended out. We got to a 39-13 victory in the end, I think largely due to fatigue and the length of the game, and the Honey Badgers had quite a few players playing both ways. We'll talk about that more in a little bit, but the other games, the other wildcard games, also congratulations to the Grangemouth Mustangs, the 9th seed. They beat the 16th seed Northampton Titans Whites 34-27. The Warrington Revolution, the 15th seed, beat the 11th seed Exeter Falcons 55-20 to secure their place in the Premiership next season. And a familiar foe of ours, the Reading Diablos, the 14th seed, beat the 10th seed West Lancashire Serpents 26-19 as well. So congratulations to those 3 teams. But it was an entertaining 4 games. Starting with our own, what did you guys make of our game and the Honey Badgers?
I think it was one of those games where it kind of started off very close, very competitive, traditional Bucks Wolves fashion of starting a little slow out of the gate, still burning off that McDonald's breakfast. But once we kind of got past that initial slump, I think in the second half we were really able to take away a little bit, force the Honey Badgers into throwing a bit more of the deep ball, which led to a couple of turnovers, and that kind of ended up sealing the game towards the end.
Is that how you saw it as well, Kaz?
Yeah, I think the big question from our point of view is who's going to be QBing for the Honey Badgers. Was it going to be Teague, or was it going to be the backup QB?
Joss Foot.
Yeah, so we'd heard a lot about Joss from different teams, about he's got an absolute cannon of an arm, and we heard that Teague might have been injured. So we didn't really know what to expect. We kind of did more research on Joss, to be honest with you, thanks to some old friends I've got at the Longhorns that gave me some info. But yeah, as Lewis said, like, it maybe took us a couple of drives to adapt. But I think it would be a common theme from my point of view throughout all of our games was the pressure that our 2 blitzers were getting on the QB absolutely bailed us out at different points and gave us that little bit more of a buffer as the rest of the defense.
Yeah, exactly. And from an offensive perspective, we didn't really know what we were going to get. We were trusting ourselves and our offense, and I said at the time, I thought we probably had one of the best sets of offensive weapons at centre and our 3 receivers, especially with Ewan, who hadn't been able to make very many of our game days throughout the year, but Ewan Ullman, who was he's a little bit older now, I'm sure he won't mind me saying that, but a quality receiver who's the biggest running threat that I've witnessed in flag so far. So it really added a different dimension to the way that we were able to combat that game. And the way we've combated the whole season, it was a completely different dimension to that entirely, I think. And
do you feel like Palooza as an offense, so obviously like Palooza, we finished 4th place. Do you think without Palooza you would have been as confident going into that game, Adam?
Not at all. I'd said to our offense, and I'm sure I've said to both of you before as well, we reworked our playbook going into Flagapalooza, knowing that a variation of a Honey Badgers team were going to be there, and teams we may face at some point later in the season as well. We put in a lot of running stuff. It was the first time that we'd had Ewan together with a full offense. And it ended up being the case that we didn't take any of that out again. That became our playbook for finals, and I would say, based on the performance throughout the day, bar a couple of silly throws and silly decisions, I think we were scoring on 85-90% of our drives throughout the course of the day, which is pretty much all you can ask for as an offense.
I think the other thing as well is it's not just that you scored on that higher percentage, it's that from what I can remember, you threw 2 picks and they were on XPs. Maybe there was a third one somewhere. Like, you didn't ever give the defense short field.
Yeah, there was one poor one, a red zone pick against the Titans, but yeah, other than that, the only other 2 picks were XP points, which were at that point it was very much a go for goal or tackle them short. I wasn't worried about them getting back to the end zone, but yeah, we were pretty efficient in everything that we did, which is not really the way that we've been as a Wolves for most of the season.
Yeah, I think, as you say, being efficient in everything that you guys did was definitely key. It wasn't like we were only scoring from big plays downfield, or only scoring from running plays, or only scoring from short targets. It was mixing it up. It was doing a bit of everything, and everything was working. And that's definitely reflected in the scores that we were putting up throughout the day. So yeah, definitely a good performance from the offense all week. And
yeah, and again, I think it was a good performance from the defense for the vast majority of the time. I know you guys will have your own opinions about how that played out, but we were a stronger defense. I mean, the scores we put up, I know obviously the Revolution game didn't come to a conclusion, but Grangemouth are a very good team with a very strong offense. The Honey Badgers, we know, have a lot of weapons, and we were able to hold both of those teams to minimal scores. I mean, the only team that really put anything up against us was that Titans B game, which we'll talk about when we talk about our own run to the plate. But it was a proper shootout.
I think as well as if you look wider than our game, I think we'd all discussed it beforehand, and I think 3 or 4 of us on the team called those results beforehand as well. Mm-hmm. So obviously we went up there with the hope of beating the Honey Badgers. We'd played the Dablos and knew that they were a strong team and thought they might upset West Lancashire.
Mm-hmm.
We said that Falcons might lose to Revolution simply based on the distances that those 2 teams had to travel. And we did think that Grangemouth Mustangs as the 9th seed would be a strong 9th seed. So we expected them to win. So to me, that wild card went with how we thought as a club that wild card round would go.
I completely agree. It is interesting to note that 3 of those 4 games went against seeding, which wasn't the case for a lot of the games throughout the weekend. But it was interesting to see that we kind of picked out. We knew that if we were to make a deep run, which I know we didn't in the end, but if we were to make a deep run for the championship, for the Div 1 championship, we kind of wanted to avoid our very old familiar foe in VPP, knowing that once this season we know how strong they are, and so we were looking at those wildcard matches, thinking that we might, have a favour done to us by what we know is a strong Diablos team, and what we assumed wouldn't necessarily be a weak Exeter team, but we were worried that, as you said, they've had to travel a long way, whereas Warrington is a stone's throw from Manchester, and the Revolution would have definitely had better numbers and just more rest.
Yeah, less fatigue. Like you say, it's. I mean, and again, if you look at it, it's 2 northern and 2 southern teams that made it through. Yeah. So BAFA tried it with the north-south divide, and it was 2 north, 2 south.
Yeah, which it might not have been if results had gone the other way. There was conversations that it might be with the exception of the Grangemouth North Titans match, it could have been 3 southern teams, it could have been 3 northern teams because of that matchup. It ended up actually probably playing itself into the right way for BAFA to have been able to configure the divisions for next year, which I'm sure is something we will talk about later or another day. Okay, so we are on the topic of ourselves and of the plate, so I thought I'd just give a rundown of how our day went, and then of our eventual plate opponents, Warrington Revolution, and then we can discuss that game in a little bit more detail, as well as any of those that we pick out from our run and their run. Obviously, we beat the 12 seed Honey Badgers 39-13, as I mentioned before. We then, I think we were slightly fortunate that we were able to play a Titans B's team who we thought we were relatively evenly matched with, and I think that is dictated by the score, we lost 35-38. Score in the final 2 minutes, and they did a fantastic job to wind the clock down in that 2 minutes and give us as minimal amount of time on the clock as they could. I think we took our drive with no timeouts and 30 seconds on the clock, and we got 2 shots from 10-15 yards out. We just weren't able to convert either of them. But I think that's a testament to the quality of both of those teams, and it was a spicy affair, as you would expect from a round of 8 quarter-final match, with importance on it. But it was a really good game, a really enjoyable game to play. We then dropped back into the plate. We played a foe we're very familiar with at Exeter Falcons. Again, fatigue, travel, whatever that may be, that game didn't really feel close throughout. We ended up winning 43-19. We then went on to play a Grangemouth team who we thought were going to be very strong and were very strong. I think that they had suffered with numbers more than we had throughout the day. And I think we went down 13-0 pretty early on. Came back to lead 14-13 with turnover and a couple of important plays, and ended up winning that 41-25. And then we played Revolution in the final, which I'll talk about in just a second. Revolution themselves started off the day very strongly. They also put up a big win against the Falcons in their wildcard round, as we discussed, 55-20. They then played our nemesis in VPP in the round of 8 and lost 48-20. They then had their plate quarter-final against the 16th seed Northants Titans White, and played out with the first of what was 2 very close, very entertaining games. They won 40-39 in that game, and although I didn't see anything of it, I had heard plenty of it by the time the day had ended. And then we were fortunate enough, our Grangemouth semi-final ended just before the Revolution and Nottingham Honey Badgers plate semi-final ended, so we were able to watch the end of that game. Revolution won 45-41. They scored at the start of the 2 minutes. They gave the ball back to the Honey Badgers, and something we spoke about, we scouted for, Joss Foots, their QB2, who I was told after the fact is a former GB javelin thrower or high-level javelin thrower, dropped back in his own end zone and unleashed a bomb that went straight up and then straight down into the hands of a receiver in the end zone almost immediately. And we thought, oh, we've got a replay against Honey Badgers, only for Warrington to put the third score in the 2-minute warning up with time basically expiring in the match, to win that 45-41.
And that drive from Warrington Revolution was pinpoint. It was well executed. It was take the gaps that were given, get out of bounds. That was excellent. Inside the 2-minute scoring, and I think they left 4 seconds on the clock, something like that, for Honey Badgers to have another pop shot. You couldn't ask for much more. Really well executed drive to win that semi-final from Revolution.
Yeah. And then we obviously met in the Division 1 plate final. I do think the 2 very tight, very intense games Warrington had to play beforehand. Not that our games weren't tight or intense, but I think we had better numbers, and we managed ourselves, I think, over the course of the day, possibly a little bit better with our diversity of players that were able to play both ways. But that game ended about 8 or 12 minutes into the first half. It was 21-6 at the time. It was wet. We spoke briefly about Ewan and his running ability, but that game we basically put the ball in his hands and said, "It's wet, you can't be tackled," and that's very much how it panned out for those first few minutes. Warrington had picked up a number of injuries throughout the day, and picked up another 2 while we were playing them. And at that point, asked if it would be okay if they were to forfeit. I don't think we had a problem with that. I don't think there was any hard feelings over them having to forfeit. I think it was understood. We accepted it. We wished them good luck, and we went and collected some medals. But just on that run, obviously from our perspective, we had a number of teams that we played, and we know a number of the teams, or at least 3 of the teams that Warrington played out their 4 matches. We spoke a little bit about that Warrington Honey Badgers game that we saw. But is there anything from our games that you guys pulled out or want to pull out and mention, either a positive and negative? Something that strikes you now you're recalling the weekend a couple of days after?
Go on, Luke, I'll let you go first.
I think the main thing that jumped out from me from when you were running through the games there was the Exeter Falcons game that we had in the plate quarterfinals, where our blitzer got 4 sacks and 2 tackles for loss in one game, including 2 sacks on the first drive from Exeter Falcons, and it really just set the tone. I think, as you say, we felt in control of that game throughout, and I think really the blitzing definitely set that tone from the off, where they weren't able to get out of their own half in the first drive because of those 2 sacks, and that just carried on throughout the game. The pressure that just made being a DB a lot easier in that game because the QB was constantly under pressure and constantly looking for options that just weren't really there. So I think, that was one game that definitely jumped out for me of the ones that you ran through.
Yeah, and I think for benefit of both our bits as Tendo and Pat, I mean, they were immense in that game in particular. And from an offensive perspective, we were a little bit deflated, and we were struggling to get ourselves back into the mindset of having to play competitive football and go out and win. Obviously, we'd lost at that point between the Manchester Titans game and the Exeter Falcons game. We'd also lost Jack Graham, who I think is one of, if not our most recognisable receiver as a Bucks Wolves player. At least he's leads the team in touchdowns of all time, and he is a massive deep threat and a very, very important player to the way that our offense works. But to lose him to injury, that he'd been fighting through for the first 2 games, we were a little bit down. But seeing the pressure and the intensity that Pat and Tendo were bringing definitely gave us the impetus we needed to pick ourselves up and then continue to drive forward, which obviously led through the rest of the day.
Yeah, I think so. From my point of view, taking that Manchester game, is we were in it throughout. It was back and forth throughout. We may have disagreed. It was a penalty-heavy game, and we may have disagreed with how those penalties were going. But also, we need to, I think, reflect on ourselves that we were putting ourselves in a position for some of those penalties to be called. We could have adapted our game a little bit better, or it is the way it is. Sometimes you're in a game where flags are thrown, and that was the case. I think we delayed the whole game day a little bit playing that Manchester game. But again, it's time for us to reflect and push on up. I think we were, as a team, were very deflated after that Manchester loss because we conceded right at the end. And then, Tendo, 2 sacks on the first drive, I think brought the whole team back up, because not only was Jack missing at that point, we also had Duds, our screaming receiver, he was potentially gone with concussion as well. So he was in concussion protocol, getting checked out by the medics, losing Jack. All of a sudden, we're like, what is this? And then, Tendo just absolutely set the tone for that, picked us all back up and got us going. Then we go on to that Mustangs game. Again, we go 13-0 down. The weather, it was raining, missed tackles on the first one. I think it was a broken play on their second TD. Number 40, I remember their receiver was their main threat, and he burnt us on those first 2 plays. And then I think what helped us is the weather dried up. That game changed. Mustangs won with the weather drying up, and obviously my pick to put us on short field scoring, just gave us that. I think it gave us more than a touchdown lead, and at that point we suddenly relaxed and took it away. And then, like you say, Warrington in that final, I think they were down to 7-8 players before we started, and I certainly was looking around going, what's with those numbers? We saw a couple of guys not coming on the field, and I remember their slot was having to get picked up, and was playing both ways, and he was hobbling about all over the place. Yeah, so it was what it was with Revolution. No hard feelings. You could see that guys were having to play both ways with injuries, and we thought that might be ourselves at one point during the Falcons game.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's probably fair that we say that our Grangemouth Mustangs game also got delayed a little bit of a disagreement as to whether zipped up pockets were an acceptable form of attire or not. Two of our receivers had zipped up pockets. We believe that they were. I think on reflection we realised that, well, you think you check the rules, Gaz, and they're not allowed, but
it's a rule that I always thought was allowed, like zipped up pockets. I always thought, fine, as long as the pockets aren't open. Got told by Alan Young at the time. It turns out he very calmly told me, no, that they're not in. There was no point in disputing it at the time. We just got on with it. Thankfully, we didn't lose the receivers. That, again, we had enough spare kit between us for the boys to be able to change into someone else's shorts. And a big turning point in that was, again, Ewan, like you say, had to discard his shorts and go down to his tighty whities, and then got the Russian TD on the very next play that he had to discard it, and he said himself he used that as fuel and as motivation to drive him on.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, congratulations to all the teams that were involved, and we hope that we will see you, those of you that got promoted, next season this time as well. Our other foes, VPP losing to Leicester Huntsmen. The Huntsmen's results, they played the Grangemouth Mustangs in their first match after Grangemouth won the wildcard. Huntsmen winning 48-13. That's the 8th seed. They then went on to play the Border City Centurions. And if memory serves, I think actually that round of 8, it was the top 8 seeds all went through. There wasn't any upsets. But that meant that Leicester were playing the top seeds, the number 1 seeds, the Border City Centurions, which I think is fair to say we didn't really know anything about going into it, and knowing that if we were to make a run, we would almost certainly have to get past them, being we were a pretty low seed and they were the top seed. But the Huntsmen came out in a 27-21 victory, and I did catch bits of that game. Border City Centurions definitely looked very, very good, very competent. The QB looked like he was nifty and nimbly. We were commenting at the time that he looked very Glasgow Hornets Nicky Farrell-esque in the way that he was carrying himself through that game. They then went on, Huntsman, to beat the Renfrewshire Raptors 46-8 in the semi-final, which I think was again a result that maybe wasn't a massive shock, but the scoreline was. It was a huge margin. And then obviously they went on to beat VPP 31-27 in that final. From a VPP perspective, they played Revolution in that first match, as we've discussed already, winning that 48-20. They then played Cardiff Storm in the quarterfinal, the 4th and 5th seed that Victoria Park won by 37-34. They then played a semi-final against Norwich Nomads that they won 33-26 before that final. At this point, I will just take a moment because as part of that quarter-final against Cardiff Storm, again, we were in and around the area at the time. Don't know how familiar other teams that maybe weren't in the space at the time, but we were on the scene and are aware that there is an investigation into an allegation that occurred during that game of an alleged offensive comment made by one player, and the subsequent reaction from another player resulted in one of the VPP players being ejected from that game, and then subsequently missing that semi-final versus Norwich Nomads. We don't know anything more than that, and this is obviously only our first episode, so we're not going to be making any comments or making any thoughts or suggestions on that but we felt that we should, even as a relatively new podcast, just state that we obviously don't condone any abuse of any kind in the sport that we all play and we all love. And we hope that if there is an investigation, that it's carried out swiftly, and that anyone found guilty of any misgivings are punished appropriately. But moving swiftly back onto to that run, obviously we know VPP very well. They play in our division. We not only that, but we know a lot of the guys, or some of us know some of the guys from outside of BAFA, from other variants of flag football, more recreational or as friends. But that final against Leicester Huntsmen, I mean, it was a very tight affair, and I think, if I remember correctly, Gaz, obviously our final ended early, so we caught bits of that, and I think you caught what could possibly be called the key moment in that game, just as you were walking over at the stroke of half time.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it was just after half time. Speaking to the VPP boys, asked how it was going, and yeah, it was great play from Leicester just before the half. They had VPP had Sam QB in, who we know how big of a threat Sam is, both physically and with his throws. Very good QB. I think at the time VPP were one score down, very close to going 2 scores each. And he threw a pick 6 just on the half time. So all of a sudden, from thinking that you're going in worst case 1 score down, hopefully evens on scores, all of a sudden you find yourselves 3 scores to 1 down, and VPP were deflated coming out of that. Speaking to the guys coming out of just after they come out of their huddle, but fair play to them to bring it back to a 4-point game. Like what a way to pick themselves up and give themselves a shot. Obviously, we hit the road and didn't see the conclusion of that. But yeah, fair play to VPP to coming back into it, but also well done for Leicester Huntsmen. What a body blow that must have been, and what a morale lifter for Leicester Huntsmen just before that half-time whistle.
Yeah, and we know the importance of seeing games out, of game management, for anyone that saw any of us at Flagapalooza. They know how much we tried to milk the clock as much as possible in that tournament. So Leicester Huntsmen, if they've managed the clock effectively, they've maintained that lead right the way through to the death. That is as important and as impressive as being an offensive powerhouse and scoring 50 plus points on an opposition. I do think that it's just worth mentioning that Cardiff Storm Victoria Park Panthers game. I think when I had looked at fixtures, those two teams were the ones that had scared me the most. We don't know much about Cardiff. They're in the southwest. We haven't played them, but they are a B team for one of the top teams in the country. Same as we know when we played the Diablos, that they are the Devils B. It's a team that is the B team of a very, very strong outfit, and that shows in the way that those teams are drilled. We saw that when we played Grangemouth, but I think that game coming out at a 37-34 shootout is a real testament to how strong both of those teams were, and how either of those teams could have won that game and marched on, regardless of the circumstances that may or may not have happened during it.
And we know as a team, we were kind of more huddled around the Norwich Nomads, Chichester Tiger Sharks game. That what a game that was as well. Lou, you probably know the Chichester Sharks boys better than I do.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, definitely a really close game, 27-26, 1 point in it, clearly coming right down to the wire. I think, again, one of those games where both teams were moving the ball really well, able to put up points, but equally, Norwich actually started really well in that game. They had a couple of stops early, put the pressure on. Chichester able to come back into it, get it that close down at the end. Obviously, on the seeding, it's a bit of an upset. Chichester having such a strong regular season, coming in third seed, South Central Division champions, arguably potentially favourites going into that game. So a bit of an upset, but a really interesting game. And actually, when you look across the other quarterfinals, 3 out of the 4 games were an upset. They went against the seed, which yeah, arguably a bit surprising, but yeah, interesting games and across the board. Definitely an interesting one to be able to sit there and watch.
And definite shout out to Norwich Nomads QB Alistair. Game clock management. He was doing it from early on. We personally said on the sideline we thought he was doing it from a little bit too far out, but shows what we know with that 1-point victory. And if only Gareth for Chichester Sharks on that XP return hadn't got cramp, fell over at 7 yards short of the 2 XP return. That's what it came down to in that game. 2 XP return, gets cramp, 7 yards short of putting it in for a 2-pointer. So
yeah, and again, it says the quality of that game, the fact that it is such fine margins. And the only thing that I'll shout out is obviously the Renfrewshire Raptors, who a few of us know. Their I believe is their defensive captain, Andy, and he's been a particularly massive influence on me, and the reason that I ended up joining BAFA Flag. I was able to catch up with him a little bit after that game, and he had high praise for the way that Leicester had played, and the Huntsmen had beat the defences that he was choosing. Was a little bit hard on himself, but Renfrewshire and Border City coming in as the top 2 seeds. I from what I saw, I didn't see anything to dissuade that they were, worthy of those rankings. I think that looking at that, basically anyone across that top 8 could have been anywhere in that top 8 of those seedings come the time that the finals came around. It was just the way that it played out. But I think Border City is still the team we know least about, because we were only able to see them in one game, and it was a loss, but it was a loss by less than a touchdown to the team that went on to win it all. So that is nothing to be sniffed at. Okay, so now let's talk Premiership, and we'll start with the Premiership plate. As we mentioned at the very start, the Reading Devils went on to win that. They beat the Cheltenham Neptunes 48-28. The Neptunes had a hell of a time getting there, and I think will be a little disappointed with the way that their day panned out, because they had a number of games that were very close. I mean, they started that first wild card round, obviously the 9th seed, that they were up against the 8th seed Broncos, and they fell by a single point. They lost 39-38. It got a little bit better going into a game against the Manchester Crows in the plate quarter final, where it was 40-all and they won on an XP shootout. I mean, at least that's what we believe. We weren't there to see it, but that's what Tornified suggested, and that's what we were led to believe when we got there after that match had finished. But if that is the case, I mean, what a way to go from losing a game by 1 point to winning it in an XP shootout. They then played London Fire in the semi-finals, plate semi-finals, winning 40-31. I think that Fire team, although we didn't see a lot of them, we did watch that game, and they were a well-drilled outfit. A number of guys we recognised from playing at Panther a couple of weeks ago, and they had performed, then very, very well without having a quarterback. So without having their first string quarterback, they did today, and they look like a very good outfit for well worth reaching a plate semi-final. And from a Reading perspective, they had beaten the Aberdeen Oil Cats in their wild card. Obviously, they were the top seed with a wild card match. They beat Aberdeen 40-13. That would become a rematch later down the line, because the Devils went to play the Titans and lost by a single point, 33-32, which again I think they'll be disappointed with. I mean, we had spoken obviously to Callum Caldine, who we all know because we played with him previous years, and we know that he was a bit disappointed. But I think it's that Manchester United team are a very strong team. We know we played their B team ourselves, and we know how well drilled they are and how well they managed to go up against us. I can only imagine it was as effective, if not more so, for the A's. The Devils went on then to play the Edinburgh Outlaws. They won that 41-28. And then they played in a rematch of that wildcard match. They played the Aberdeen Oil Cats again in the plate semi-final, winning 27-24. Again, showing that kind of progression throughout the day from Aberdeen side that I think probably a little disappointed with that early match, but also whether the Devils were feeling it a bit, or we weren't as hot as they were early in the day, but they were able to pick themselves up, and obviously then had that match against Cheltenham to win 48-28 and secure the plate, which means that Caldean's no better than us. He came home with a plate just like we did. Obviously, we're not Prem players, and we hope to have some Prem players.
Whoa! I'll interrupt you right there. We are Prem players.
Okay, we are Prem players now. We're not national players, however. So we don't have the same kind of knowledge. We aim to have some guests on in future that are able to shed a lot more light into a number of the guys. But I mean, we've played against a number of the guys for both the Scottish teams, all the Scottish teams. When we played one of the Scoff teams at Panther Bowl the other week, we know how good they are. But what did you guys make of both Cheltenham and the Devils' run, if you've had a chance to look through any of those results and speak to anyone?
I think that the overarching theme that would jump out to me is just how close all the games were. Like, yes, in their individual runs, but also across the board, across the day on the Prem Day, and that really speaks to what the national division is going to look like next year, with those 12 teams from the Prem Finals on Saturday forming that division next year. There's going to be some very competitive games every week. Obviously, that was the intention of splitting it the way that they did, and why this option obviously was voted in by the various clubs in BAFA. And I think there's a lot to look forward to next year for those teams in terms of closely contested games every week. Very competitive, very interesting games for them to look forward to next year.
And then obviously the big games that we did see, we were able, I think all of us were there in time to see the semi-finals and the final in the Prem. And again, just looking at the semi-finals and the final, the Smoke, London Smoke beat Cardiff Hurricanes 26-24 in an incredibly close game that came down to right to the last play. And Glasgow Hornets beat Manchester Titans 33-27. So again, only 6 points in that game as well. And that was before the Hornets went on to win it all for the second year in a row, beating London Smoke by 9, 27-18. And we were able to sit and watch, that final right the way throughout. And I think it was a really professional game from the Hornets. They, from my opinion at least, they controlled the game. They scored first. They shut London Smoke out a couple of times in that first half. They just seemed to have a little bit of an edge right the way through that game, whether it was, I think there were a couple of interceptions. I think one was an interception in the end zone to stop Smoke scoring early in that game on the first or the second drive. For whatever reason, they just seemed to have an edge. I also think they played it smartly. I think they played a good series of mind games. There was a little bit of afters that seemed to be going on a couple of times during that game, but I think it worked in their favour. There are some dark arts to the sport, and I don't know what happened. I didn't see anything that had happened, but I know that there was a bit of a blow up midway through that second half, but it ended up being in the Hornets' favour in the end.
I think that's just competitive elite level flag, mate. I don't think there was anything in any of that whatsoever. I think it was a good tight game. I can't remember the Hornets receiver, but on their final drive to get the first down to essentially kill the game, kill the clock with the diving grab just over the halfway line is the standout moment from me. Absolutely great individual moment of brilliance right there. But if you're London Smoke, again, far better players than I am, but do you feel like you lost that, or do you feel like Glasgow won it? Because there was some big drops in that second half from London Smoke.
Yeah, I agree. I think Smoke will be looking at that thinking we only put up 18 points. That's pretty low score from their standards, and I think you're right. Yeah, they'll be looking at that thinking we left something on the table there. We definitely could have showed up more for that game and made it closer than it ended up being. Completely agree. Glasgow Hornets played really well, but I think it definitely could have been a closer contest if Smoke could cut out some of those mistakes that we saw.
Yeah, agreed. I think Smoke will be thinking that it was theirs to lose, and I think that the Hornets will be thinking that they've gone away and taken it from Smoke and won it themselves. But I think either way, it was a good demonstration of what a high level flag in this country looks like, because it was a high quality game. It was entertaining to watch. It was it was a fun Saturday afternoon to get to watch teams of that quality, knowing that our games on Sunday were probably not going to be quite at that level.
I think the other thing I'd say on this is like we spoke earlier in the show about the level of upsets that we had in the Div 1 final was actually in the Prem. The semi-finals were the top 4 seeds, the final were the top 2 seeds. I think if at the start of the day you'd said there'd be the teams that were there at the end, I don't think anyone would have been overly surprised. I think it's interesting, I guess, the benefits of having those cross-conference games to level that up and get maybe more reliable seeding going into the finals. Something that most of the divisions in most of the conferences in Div 1 didn't benefit from this year. Maybe that's why we saw more upsets in terms of the seed rankings. As I say, if you said at the start of the day that you'd have a Hornet Smoke final, nobody would have been surprised at all. And that's definitely reflected in the fact that they're the top 2 teams in the country at the minute. I'm sure Hornets will say that they're in a league of their own at the minute, having won it 2 years in a row. Definitely the ones to beat for next year.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really good point. Obviously, as we and a number of the teams that we faced and know well will be moving up to the Prem, hoping that there will be more cross conference. Will again weed out where or strengthen the seeds of certain teams and weaken the seeds of others. We might be on the positive end, we might be on the negative end of that come the end of next season. But I think, you look at the Prem this season, and it was the top 4 seeds that were in the semis, whereas for Div 1 it was first and second. The first seed was not. The second seed made the semis but lost, and it was the 5th and the 8th seed that played out the final, and it was the 8th seed that won it. So again, it is I think very difficult when you get down to a Div 1 level, where I think it is right that travel is more localized to get people. I mean, we've spoken about this on the weekend, but to get people into the sport, you have to keep travel more localized. But having that gap now of the Premiership, and before you get to the elite of the national, will be able to be a proper stepping stone for a number of teams to build on momentum, build on the fact that they're playing higher quality opposition, and for us will be a much stronger, sterner test, playing some established teams from that division when we face them off in the South next year.
Yeah, and I think it benefits us as a club as well. Obviously, we've got our second team. We are glad we got promoted, because as much fun as we have playing our second team, those 2 teams are in 2 very different places. So having the 2 teams in the 2 tiers is what we wanted as a club, and it's what we've now got as a club, and it's for us a club now to maintain Bucks as a Premiership side.
Yeah, exactly. And which is, again, it is early, but obviously the goal as a minimum will be to make sure that we are still in the Premiership come the year after next. All right. Well, that is the end of our first episode. To anyone that has taken the time out of their day to listen, thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. We hope to be able to put out semi-regular episodes on this. We are intending to use the off-season as an opportunity to test out a number of different formats, try some different episodes, and see what format will work best for us when the season does start. On that front, if anyone would like to follow us on Instagram, we have set up some socials for that, and just in the break set up a social so that we can share that as part of this. So we've set up at the Southside Flag on Instagram. And for anyone that does know us, anyone that plays for another team and is listening to this, if you are interested in reaching out, coming on as a guest, we would like to have guests from other teams that can give us perspectives from inside their division, inside the national or Division 1 next year when that's set up, or other teams outside of ourselves. Please reach out either on the Instagram handle, or you can reach out directly to me or to the Bucks Wolves. Any of those channels, anything will get filtered through to us. And finally, having discussed it, we plan to release another episode in the not too distant future, and we will look ahead at what the league structure may look like next season, now that we have a final idea of all of the teams in each of the divisions. There's some interesting conversations to be had about how that new look Prem will work out with the teams and the structure, and how certain teams might have a little bit further to travel than previous. But thank you again for listening. That has been the Southside Podcast. We will see you all soon.